The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was kneading bread dough, flour dusting my hands and forearms. I'd always found baking therapeutic. The rhythmic push and pull, the earthy scent of yeast. My phone pinged from the counter, and I wiped my hands on my apron before checking it. The message was brief, just a few lines from my daughter Megan, but it hit with the force of a physical blow. "Mom, about graduation next month. I've been thinking it might be better if you don't. Come! There'll be a lot of important people there, and honestly, I'm worried you might not fit in. Hope you understand." I read it 3 times, certain I'd misunderstood. My fingers hovered over the screen, waiting for a follow-up message, maybe a "just kidding," or "my roommate took my phone." But nothing came. I set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter, and stared at the half-kneaded dough, now forgotten. The silence in my small kitchen felt suddenly suffocating. I pulled out a chair and sat down, my legs unexpectedly weak. My daughter, the same girl I'd raised alone for 23 years, was uninviting me from her college graduation, the moment we'd both worked toward since she was old enough to understand what college meant. The crown jewel of her education, at Princeton University, where she'd studied political science with dreams of law school. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to contain the sharp ache blossoming there. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I hadn't always been a single mother. When Megan was 7, her father Thomas walked out, leaving behind mounting debts and a half-empty closet. He'd found parenthood too constraining for his ambitions, he explained during our last conversation. Too ordinary. He wanted more than the life we'd built in our modest home in Millbrook, a small town outside of Albany, New York. After he left, Megan and I forged a bond that seemed unbreakable. In those early days, we created traditions just for us, Sunday. Morning pancakes shaped like animals, summer evening walks to the ice cream shop, Christmas Eve movie marathons with homemade popcorn. I worked as a nurse at the local hospital, taking extra shifts when I could, and eventually moving to the night shift for the higher pay differential. Those years were exhausting, but full of purpose. Every sacrifice had a point, to give Megan the opportunities I never had. When she was in middle school, I noticed her exceptional intelligence and drive. Her teachers suggested advanced classes, academic competitions, summer enrichment programs. "Your daughter could go anywhere," her 8th grade teacher told me during a parent conference. "She has that spark." I took those words to heart, pinning them like a North Star in my mind. If Megan could go anywhere, I would make sure nothing stood in her way, especially not money. I picked up weekend shifts at a private care facility. I learned to cut corners where I could, buying clothes from thrift stores, clipping coupons, until my fingers cramped, keeping our thermostat low in winter and high in summer. We never discussed these sacrifices. I didn't want Megan to feel the weight of our financial reality. When she was 16, we visited Princeton on a college tour. It was a crisp autumn day, the campus ablaze with red and gold leaves. Megan walked, wide-eyed among the historic buildings, trailing her fingers along ivy-covered walls. "Can you imagine studying here?" she whispered, her face alight with possibility. I couldn't imagine it. Not really. The grandeur of the place, the obvious wealth, the legacy students whose parents and grandparents had walked those same paths. What I could imagine was the tuition bill. But I smiled and squeezed her hand. "If this is where you want to be, we'll find a way," I promised. That night, after we returned to our budget hotel room, I sat in the bathroom with the door closed and researched Princeton's financial aid policies. The numbers made my stomach clench, even with aid. But I remembered the look on Megan's face and started making plans. The next day, I called my mother, Ruth. We'd had a complicated relationship over the years. She'd never approved of Thomas and hadn't hidden her "I told you so" when he left. But she had one thing I needed: money. Not wealth exactly, but comfort from decades of careful saving and a modest inheritance from my grandfather. We hadn't spoken in months, but I swallowed my pride and called. "Princeton." She scoffed when I explained. "Margaret, be realistic. That's not for people like us." "It could be for Megan," I insisted. "She's brilliant, Mom. She deserves this chance." The silence stretched long before she sighed. "Come over Sunday. We'll talk about it." That conversation led to an arrangement. My mother would help with Megan's education on 2 conditions. First, the money would be presented as a series of merit scholarships through her church organization. Second, Megan would never know the money came from family. "I won't have her feeling like a charity case," my mother declared. "And frankly, I don't trust that you won't try to take credit for my contribution." The words stung, but I agreed. The goal was getting Megan to Princeton, not soothing my ego. My mother set up a separate account and began transferring funds. I contributed everything I could save from my own earnings. Between my mother's help, my savings, financial aid, and 2 small actual scholarships Megan earned, we cobbled together enough for her to attend her dream school. When her acceptance letter arrived spring of her senior year, Megan screamed with joy, dancing around our kitchen. "We did it, Mom!" she cried, flinging her arms around my neck. "I never thought I could actually go." "I always knew you could," I said, hugging her tightly, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. In that moment, every double shift, every missed social event, every cold winter morning seemed worth it. The transition wasn't easy. Moving Megan into her freshman dorm, I felt the disparity between us and the other families acutely. They arrived in luxury SUVs packed with brand new everything. We pulled up in my 12-year-old Honda with carefully selected secondhand furnishings. I wore my best outfit, a department store dress I'd purchased on clearance 3 years earlier. Megan's roommate's parents wore what looked like designer clothes, the mother's diamond earrings catching the light as she arranged her daughter's decorative pillows. But Megan seemed oblivious to these differences, too excited about starting her new life to notice. She hugged me fiercely before I left, whispering, "I'll make you proud, Mom." I cried the entire 3-hour drive home. The changes came gradually. First semester, Megan called almost daily, full of stories about classes, professors, new friends. She came home for Thanksgiving and fell back into our old rhythms, helping me cook, watching our favorite shows together, telling me everything. By sophomore year, the calls had dwindled to weekly check-ins. She stayed on campus for fall break to attend networking events. When she did come home, she spent most of her time texting friends or studying. I told myself this was normal, healthy, even. She was building her own life. Junior year brought more distance. She secured a prestigious summer internship at a law firm in Washington, D.C., eliminating our usual summer together. When I visited campus for family weekend, she introduced me quickly to her friends before rushing us to scheduled activities. I noticed she never mentioned my job or where we lived, describing me vaguely as in healthcare when someone asked what I did. I began to feel like a supporting character in her life, necessary but uninteresting. Still, I continued working extra shifts, depositing money into our Princeton fund, sending care packages she rarely acknowledged. When I expressed concern about the growing divide between us, she brushed it off as me being too sensitive. "I'm just busy, Mom," she'd say, a hint of irritation in her voice. "This is what you wanted for me, remember? To take advantage of every opportunity." The first real warning came during winter break of her senior year. Megan brought home her boyfriend, James, a third-generation Princeton student whose family had a building named after them on campus. He was polite but distant, his eyes sliding around our small house as if cataloging its deficiencies. The 3 of us sat in the living room drinking hot chocolate. When James asked about my career, Megan jumped in before I could answer. "Mom's basically a healthcare administrator," she said, though I was still working regular nursing shifts. "She manages patient care flow." Later, after James went to bed in our guest room, I confronted her. "Why did you lie about my job?" I asked quietly. She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I didn't lie. I just emphasized the administrative aspects. James's parents are both surgeons. I didn't want him to think." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Think what? That your mother works with her hands? That I wear scrubs instead of suits? "You're twisting this," she said, defensive now. "I'm just trying to navigate a social environment you don't really understand. Everything is connections. At this level, Mom. Perception matters." I went to bed that night with a heaviness in my chest I couldn't name. Something fundamental had shifted, but I couldn't pinpoint when or how. The last straw came during their brief visit to my mother's house. Ruth had insisted on meeting James, curious about the boy who might someday be family. My mother lived more comfortably than I did, in a well-appointed colonial with an actual dining room and antique furniture. Megan seemed to relax there, proudly, showing James around as if it were her own home. At dinner, my mother mentioned the scholarship fund she'd established at her church. "We've helped several promising students over the years," she said, maintaining our agreed-upon fiction. James looked interested. "That's impressive for a local church. What's the fund called? My family's foundation might be interested in matching. Grants for educational initiatives." My mother and I exchanged quick glances. "The New Horizons Scholarship," she improvised smoothly. "It's still quite small, but growing." Later, in the kitchen, I overheard Megan tell James, "My grandmother comes from old money. Very modest about it, but she's funded several scholarships. That's where I get my interest in philanthropy." I nearly dropped the dishes I was carrying. Megan had never expressed any interest in philanthropy, and my mother's comfortable lifestyle came from decades of teaching school and careful investing, not old money. The casual lie stunned me. Who was this young woman, so eager to reinvent her background? That night, after James and Megan returned to my house, my mother pulled me aside. "She's ashamed," she said bluntly. "Of you, of where she comes from. You've let her become someone who values appearances over substance." "That's not fair," I protested. "She's just trying to fit into a world that's different from ours." My mother fixed me with a hard stare. "No, Margaret. She's trying to pretend our world doesn't exist. There's a difference." Those words echoed in my mind in the weeks after Megan returned to school. I tried to dismiss them as the judgment of a critical grandmother, but each brief, distracted call from Megan seemed to confirm my mother's assessment. When she mentioned graduation celebrations, I offered to book a hotel near campus and make dinner reservations. "Actually," she hedged, "I might be pretty booked with department events and things with James's family. Let me get back to you on, specific plans." She never did. Instead, I received that email on a Tuesday morning, asking me not to come at all. As I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my flour-covered hands, the pain of rejection crystallized into something harder: determination. I picked up my phone and typed a response. "I understand. Let me know if you change your mind." Then I called my mother. "Ruth," I said when she answered, "I need to break our agreement about Megan's tuition." There was a pause. "She's uninvited. You from graduation, hasn't she?" I shouldn't have been surprised that she'd guessed. "Yes. She says I won't fit in. And now you want to throw it in her face that we've been paying her way? That's petty, Margaret." "No," I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "Not petty. Honest. I've let her believe a fiction that's hurting both of us. It's time for the truth." My mother was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she sighed. Maybe you're right. The girl needs a reality check. What's your plan? I spent the next 3 weeks gathering documentation. Bank statements showing transfers to Princeton, receipts from textbook purchases, pay stubs from my extra shifts at the care facility. My mother provided her own records, the regular deposits into our shared Princeton account, investment withdrawals timed to tuition deadlines. I also pulled together photographs, Megan and me in front of our small house on the day of her high school graduation, the two of us assembling her dorm room furniture, my hospital ID badge showing my actual position as a registered nurse, my date book with highlighted back-to-back shifts during her expensive sophomore study abroad semester. The story they told was clear: a single mother and a grandmother who had sacrificed comfort, time, and financial security to give a talented young woman access to an elite education. Not through old money or mysterious church scholarships, but through deliberate choices and hard work. I didn't tell Megan I was coming to graduation. I booked a hotel room and requested the day off work months in advance. The morning of the ceremony, I dressed carefully in a new outfit I'd saved for, a simple but elegant blue dress that matched my eyes, low heels I could walk comfortably in. I styled my hair and applied light makeup. I looked like what I was, a proud mother on an important day. The Princeton campus was even more beautiful than I remembered, sunlight glinting off historic buildings, perfectly manicured lawns dotted with chairs for the ceremony. I spotted Megan immediately, standing with a group of friends and James's family, her graduation robe open over an expensive-looking white dress I'd never seen before. I approached slowly, giving her time to notice me. When she did, her smile froze, her eyes widening in panic. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she hissed, stepping away from her group. "I came to see my daughter graduate," I said simply. "Congratulations, Megan. You've worked so hard for this." She glanced nervously toward James's parents, who were watching with curious expressions. "I thought we agreed." "No," I interrupted gently. "You decided." "I never agreed." Before she could respond, James approached, extending his hand politely. "Mrs. Bennett, nice to see you again. I'm glad you could make it." "Thank you, James. I wouldn't have missed it." James's parents joined us, introducing themselves as Robert and Catherine Powell. They were exactly as I'd imagined them: polished, confident, clearly wealthy, but not ostentatious about it. "We've heard so much about Megan," Catherine said warmly. "She's a remarkable young woman. You must be incredibly proud." "I am," I agreed, meeting Megan's panicked gaze calmly. "I've watched her overcome incredible obstacles to be here." "Obstacles?" Robert asked, interested. "I was under the impression Megan came from quite a comfortable background. She mentioned your family's scholarship foundation." I saw Megan's face drain of color. This was the moment I'd planned for, the revelation I'd imagined delivering with righteous anger. But standing there, seeing my daughter's fear, I felt no satisfaction, only sadness for the shame she'd been carrying. "Megan has had tremendous family support," I said carefully. "But not in the way you might think. My mother and I worked extremely hard to make Princeton possible for her. I'm a registered nurse, night shifts for most of Megan's college years. My mother is a retired teacher who invested wisely. Between us, we managed tuition that was more than my annual salary." Megan stared at me mortified. "Mom, please!" "It's nothing to be ashamed of," I continued, my voice gentle but firm. "Hard work and sacrifice for someone you love is something to be proud of. I've always been proud of where I come from and what I do. I had hoped you were too." A heavy silence fell over our small group. James's parents exchanged glances I couldn't interpret. James himself looked uncomfortable, but not disgusted or scornful. "Well," Catherine said finally, "that explains Megan's extraordinary work ethic. Now we know where she gets it from." Robert nodded. Indeed. Our family foundation actually has a specific interest in first-generation college students. We should talk after the ceremony, Mrs. Bennett. They excused themselves tactfully, leaving Megan and me alone. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "How could you?" she whispered. "You've ruined everything." "No, Megan. I've just told the truth. Something you should have been proud to tell yourself." She shook her head, too upset to continue the conversation. "I need to line up for the processional," she said, turning away. I found my seat in the audience, my emotions a tangle of hurt, vindication, and lingering doubt. Had I done the right thing? As the ceremony began, I watched hundreds of young people in identical robes and caps march toward their futures. When Megan's name was called, I stood and applauded, my heart swelling despite everything. Afterward, in the mingling crowd, I kept my distance, allowing Megan space with her friends and James's family. I was preparing to leave when I felt a touch on my arm. It was Megan, still in her graduation robe, her eyes red-rimmed. "Why did you really come?" she asked, her voice small. "To humiliate me?" "No," I said, reaching into my purse for the envelope I'd prepared. "To give you this." She opened it hesitantly. Inside were the bank statements, receipts, and photographs. I'd gathered the evidence of our sacrifices. She flipped through them slowly, her expression changing from defensiveness to shame to something harder to define. "Mom, You don't need to say anything right now," I interrupted. "Just know that I have never, not once, been embarrassed to be your mother. Even when you were embarrassed by me." She looked up, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I wasn't embarrassed by you," she said. "I was embarrassed by me, by the fact that I needed help, that I couldn't do this on my own. Everyone here comes from so much, and I have so little." "That's not true," I said firmly. "You have everything important: intelligence, determination, and people who love you enough to help you succeed. That's not something to hide. It's something to honor." She wiped her eyes. "James's parents want us all to have dinner together, even after what you said, what I let them believe." "That's because they recognize value when they see it," I said. "Not the kind you can put in a bank, but the kind that builds character." She hesitated, then asked in a small voice, "Will you come to dinner?" It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was an invitation back into her life, one made with open eyes and honesty. I nodded. I'd be honored. That evening, sitting at a table with James's wealthy family, I didn't try to be someone I wasn't. I spoke about my nursing career. With pride, shared stories of raising Megan, answered questions about our financial journey honestly. Megan watched me with new eyes, seeing perhaps for the first time the strength it had taken to get her where she was. Later that night, in my hotel room, Megan came to talk. She sat on the edge of the bed, turning her class ring around her finger. "I've been thinking about what you said, about honor." I waited, giving her space to continue. "I was so focused on fitting in that I forgot what really matters," she said slowly. "You and Grandma gave up so much for me, and I acted like it was something shameful instead of something beautiful." "Why?" I asked gently. "Why was it so important to seem like someone else?" She looked up, vulnerability in her eyes. "Because I was scared. What if they found out I didn't belong here? What if James realized I wasn't from his world? What if all of this disappeared?" "But it wouldn't have," I said. "Your place at Princeton, your relationship with James, those things are built on who you are, not what you have." She nodded, tears gathering again. "I know that now, or I'm starting to." She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Mom, for the email, for all of it." I moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. I didn't come here for an apology. I came because no matter what, I'm your mother. That doesn't change because you wish it would." She leaned against my shoulder the way she used to as a child. "I don't wish that. Not anymore." We sat in silence for a while before she spoke. Again. "James's father offered me a job today, at their foundation, working on educational access initiatives." I smiled at the irony. "Are you going to take it?" "I think so," she said. "But I want to do it right. Tell my story honestly. Use it to help others like me." That sounds like a good start. The why. Next morning, Megan and I had breakfast with my mother, who had driven down for the occasion despite not attending the ceremony. The three of us sat together, 3 generations of women who had fought for something important in different ways. "So," my mother said directly to Megan, "have you learned anything from all this?" Megan met her gaze steadily. "Yes, that I come from a line of incredibly stubborn women who don't give up easily, and that I'm lucky for it." My mother's stern expression softened into a rare smile. "Well, maybe there's hope for you yet?" As I watched them together, I realized something important. The greatest gift we'd given Megan wasn't Princeton. It was the example of women who knew their own worth, regardless of external validation. It had taken her a while to understand that lesson, but now that she had, it would serve her far better than any Ivy League degree. In the months that followed, Megan and I rebuilt our relationship on more honest ground. She took the job with the Powell Foundation, where she developed scholarship programs for students from backgrounds like hers. She spoke publicly about her journey, crediting her mother and grandmother's sacrifices for making it possible. The shame that had driven her to hide her background transformed into a passionate advocacy for educational access. The young woman, who once fabricated old money to impress a boyfriend's parents, now proudly told audiences about her mother, the night shift nurse, and her grandmother, the public school teacher. As for me, I continued my nursing career, eventually moving to a day shift position that allowed for more normal hours. I started taking occasional trips, small indulgences after years of saving every penny for Megan's education. I visited her in New York City, where she and James had moved after their wedding. Their apartment was beautiful but welcoming, no pretension despite their means. One evening during my visit, Megan and I walked through Central Park, the autumn. Leaves reminding me of that long-ago college tour. "Do you regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Spending so much on Princeton when it made me lose sight of what mattered?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally, "because eventually, it helped you see more clearly. Sometimes people need to get lost before they can find their way home." She squeezed my hand, the gesture an echo from years before. "I'm home now," she said, "and I'm not ashamed of where I come from anymore." That was the real graduation, not the ceremony with the cap and gown, but the moment when my daughter finally understood that her worth had never depended on fitting in. It had always been about standing tall in her own truth, just as I had tried to teach her all along. The subtle shift in our relationship didn't happen overnight. Looking back, I can pinpoint dozens of small moments that signaled the change, like stones marking a path I was too blind to see. When Megan returned for winter break during her junior year, the distance between us had grown beyond the miles between Princeton and our small town of Millbrook. She spent most of that visit locked in her bedroom, texting friends or working on applications for summer internships. When she did emerge, she seemed distracted, her mind clearly elsewhere. "Sorry, what did you say?" she'd ask, glancing up from her phone when I tried to engage her in conversation. That phrase, "Sorry, what did you say?" became the soundtrack of our time together. I told myself this was normal, just part of her growing independence, the natural separation between a mother and daughter. But deep down, I recognized something more deliberate in her detachment. One evening, I knocked on her bedroom door with a mug of hot chocolate made the way she'd always loved, with whipped cream and a dash of cinnamon. "Come in," she called, barely looking up as I entered. Her room had changed since she left for college. She'd taken down most of the high school memorabilia, the track team photos, the academic award certificates, the map where we'd pinned all the colleges she'd applied to. The walls were now mostly bare except for a Princeton pennant and a framed photo of her with a group of friends I didn't recognize, all dressed in formal attire. "Thought you might like your favorite," I said, setting the mug on her desk. "You've been working so hard." She glanced at the hot chocolate. "Thanks, but I'm trying to cut back on sugar." I perched on the edge of her bed. "New diet?" She shrugged. "Just being more conscious of what I eat. Most of my friends are really health-focused." "Well, one mug won't hurt," I encouraged. "Besides, it's our tradition." She finally looked at me directly, her expression softening slightly. "You're right. Thanks, Mom." She took a small sip, then set it aside. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." My heart lifted. This was the opening I'd been waiting for, a chance to reconnect. "Of course, anything." Megan closed her laptop and swiveled in her chair to face me. "I've been invited to spend part of spring break at Catherine and Robert's house in Aspen. James and some of our friends will be there. They have this amazing chalet, and it's basically a tradition for their family." "Oh," I said, working to keep disappointment from my voice. Spring break was the next time I'd expected to see her. I'd already requested time off work. "That sounds like quite an opportunity." "It really is," she said, enthusiasm coloring her voice for the first time since she'd been home. "They do this big charity event while they're there, a ski competition that raises money for education initiatives. It would be great for networking." I nodded, recognizing her excitement and not wanting to dampen it. "When would you go?" "That's the thing," she said, her expression growing more careful. "It's the whole break, 10 days. I'd fly directly there from Princeton and then back to school afterward." The realization landed like a stone in my stomach. She wasn't just missing spring break at home. She was orchestrating a schedule that eliminated any need to return to Millbrook at all. "I see," I said carefully. "Well, it does sound like a wonderful opportunity." "So you're okay with it?" she pressed, watching my reaction. I took a breath, reminding myself that this was what I'd worked for, to give her access to experiences and connections I could never provide. "Of course. I'm just a little disappointed I won't see you, but I understand." Relief washed over her face. "Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate it." She turned back to her laptop, clearly considering the conversation finished. I lingered, hoping for more. Details about her classes, stories about her friends, anything that would give me a glimpse into her life at school. But she was already typing again, her attention reclaimed by the screen. "I'll let you get back to work," I said finally, standing. She murmured, not looking up as I left the room. The hot chocolate sat untouched, a skin forming on its surface. That night, I called my mother, seeking perspective, or perhaps just comfort. Ruth had grown softer since our agreement about Megan's tuition, our shared purpose creating a bridge over old disagreements. "She's not coming home for spring break," I told her after we'd exchanged greetings. "She's going to Aspen with her boyfriend's family instead." "Not surprising," Ruth replied pragmatically. "She's getting a taste of how the other half lives." "I know it's a good opportunity for her," I said, trying to convince myself as much as my mother. "But it feels like she's pulling away more and more." "She is," Ruth confirmed bluntly. "The question is whether she's moving toward something better or just running from where she started." "What's that supposed to mean?" My mother sighed. "Margaret, you've given that girl everything, sacrificed everything, to put her in a world that judges people like us. Are you really surprised? She's trying to adapt, to blend in. It's survival. Her words struck me with unexpected force. I'd never thought of Megan's behavior as survival, as a necessary adaptation to her new environment. I'd seen it only as rejection. But does adapting mean cutting me out completely? I asked quietly. That depends on whether she thinks you're an asset or a liability in that world. My mother's voice softened slightly. You need to prepare yourself, Margaret. The more she becomes part of that Princeton crowd, the more our lives might seem insufficient to her. I'm not ashamed of our lives, I said firmly. We've always had enough. We've always been happy. Yes, but happiness looks different. Depending on where you're standing, Ruth replied. Right now, she's standing in marble hallways with people who summer in Aspen. That changes a person's perspective. After we hung up, I wandered through my small house, seeing it suddenly through Megan's eyes. The worn furniture we'd had since she was a child, the outdated kitchen with its laminate countertops, the family photos in discount store frames. Had these things become embarrassing to her? Had I? Spring came, and with it, Megan's trip to Aspen. She posted photos on social media, careful, curated glimpses of a life that seemed to belong to someone else's daughter. Megan in designer ski wear, posing on a mountaintop. Megan at a formal charity dinner, wearing a dress I'd never seen, her arm linked with James's. Megan laughing with a group of impossibly polished-looking young people, a champagne flute in her hand. I scrutinized each image, searching for something familiar in her expression and her smile. Sometimes I caught a glimpse, a certain tilt of her head, a particular crinkle around her eyes when she laughed genuinely. But mostly, she looked like a stranger playing a part, every detail carefully arranged to convey belonging. She called, once during the trip, the connection spotty as she walked between events. How is it? I asked, hungry for details beyond the polished images she shared online. It's amazing, she gushed. The Powells know everyone. Catherine introduced me to the dean of Harvard Law yesterday. He's an old family friend. And there's this senator who's staying at the chalet next door. She continued, dropping names I didn't recognize, describing connections that seemed important primarily because of their exclusivity. I listened, trying to find joy in her excitement while tamping down the growing sense that she was crafting a narrative specifically designed to emphasize the distance between her new life and her old one. What about the skiing? I asked, attempting to ground the conversation in something more tangible. You were always such a natural on the slopes. This was an exaggeration. Megan had skied exactly twice during high school trips, showing no particular talent for it. Oh, right, she said, her voice faltering slightly. Well, everyone here has been skiing since they were toddlers, so I'm a bit behind. But James has been giving me lessons. I pictured my confident daughter struggling to keep up, trying not to reveal her inexperience. I'm sure you're doing great, I encouraged. Just be careful not to push yourself too hard. Mom, she said, an edge entering her voice. I'm not a child. I know my limits. Of course you do, I backpedaled. I didn't mean, I need to go, she interrupted. We're heading to a reception. I'll call you later, okay? She didn't call later. In fact, I didn't hear from her again until after she'd returned to Princeton, when she sent a brief text thanking me for being understanding about the trip. Attached was a photo of a small gift, a coffee mug with Aspen written across it in cursive script. The rest of her junior year passed in a similar fashion, sporadic communication, punctuated by carefully curated updates that felt more like press releases than genuine sharing. When summer approached, I assumed she would come home at least briefly, before starting her internship in Washington. Instead, she informed me that she'd be spending 2 weeks with James's family at their summer home on Cape Cod, before heading to D.C. But I've barely seen you all year, I said during one of our Increasingly rare phone conversations. I thought we might have a little time together before your internship. I know, and I'm sorry, she said, her tone conciliatory but firm. But this is really important, Mom. The Powells are introducing me to their whole summer community. These are connections that could make a huge difference in my career. I swallowed my disappointment. Of course, I understand. Maybe you could visit me in D.C., she offered. Just for a weekend or something. We could do tourist stuff. The suggestion surprised me. I'd love that, I said quickly, before she could reconsider. Just let me know when would work for you. Great, she said. I'll check my schedule once I get settled and let you know. That promised invitation never materialized. July slipped into August with various excuses. Her workload was intense. There was a special weekend event she couldn't miss. A heat wave made sightseeing impractical. Before I knew it, she was heading back to Princeton for her senior year, and our planned visit had evaporated like morning dew under a hot sun. Fall brought a new phase in our evolving relationship. Megan began calling more regularly, but with a specific focus: her post-graduation plans. She had decided to take a year off before law school to work for a political consulting firm in New York, a position secured through, unsurprisingly, a connection of the Powells. It's perfect timing, she explained during one call. James will be starting at his father's investment firm, and we're looking at apartments in Manhattan. Nothing too extravagant, just a one-bedroom to get us started. I paused, processing this information. You and James are moving in together? Yes, she confirmed, a defensive note entering her voice. It makes sense financially, and we've been together almost 2 years now. It wasn't the relationship that surprised me. I'd assumed things were serious between them. But the casual way she announced a major life decision, as if it were a detail rather than a milestone. That's a big step, I said carefully. Are you sure you're ready? She sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. Mom, I'm almost 23. Most of my friends have been living with their partners for years. I just want to make sure you've thought it through, I persisted. Living with someone reveals a lot about compatibility. We practically live together now, she said dismissively. And the apartment his parents are helping us find is amazing. Pre-war building, doorman, walking distance to the park. I noted the mention of his parents' involvement, wondering if they were contributing financially as well. It sounds lovely. Will you be able to afford it on an entry-level salary? She hesitated. Well, James will be making considerably more than me, so we'll split expenses proportionally. And his parents are covering the security deposit as a graduation gift. Of course they were. I swallowed the comment I wanted to make about independence and self-sufficiency. Instead, I asked, when can I see this fancy new apartment? Another pause. We're still in the early stages of looking. I'll let you know when we find something. As winter break approached, I hoped Megan would spend at least part of it at home. Her previous year's visit, though distant, had at least given us some time together. But once again, she had other plans. The Powells have invited me to join them for Christmas in London, she explained during a quick call between classes. James's sister Emily lives there with her husband, and the whole family is going. They've rented this amazing house in Kensington. The disappointment was so familiar now that it had lost some of its sting. London for Christmas sounds wonderful, I said, working to keep my voice light. What a special opportunity. It really is, she agreed, seemingly relieved by my positive response. Emily's husband works for the Foreign Service, and they're hosting a Christmas Eve reception at their home. There will be diplomats and government officials there, exactly the kind of people I need to meet for my career. Always the networking, the strategic connections. I wondered when my daughter had become so calculating, so focused on professional advancement at the expense of personal relationships. Will you be home at all during the break? I asked, already knowing the answer. Probably not this time, she admitted. We're in London until the 28th, and then James and I are meeting friends in Vermont for New Year's. Classes start again on January 10th, so it doesn't really make sense to come all the way to Millbrook for just a few days. I took a breath, fighting the urge to remind her that Millbrook was still her home, that I was still her mother, that family wasn't something to fit in when convenient. Instead, I said, "I understand. I'll miss you, but I want you to enjoy your trip." "Thanks, Mom," she said, sounding genuinely grateful. "I'll bring you something special from London, I promise." True to her word, a package arrived in early January. A beautiful wool scarf from Liberty of London, elegantly patterned in blues and greens. The gift was thoughtful, chosen with my taste in mind. I wrapped it around my neck, standing in front of the mirror in my empty house, and allowed myself a moment of hope. Perhaps the distance between us wasn't as vast as it seemed. Perhaps she still knew me, still thought of me, even as she built her new life. That hope sustained me through the long winter months as Megan's graduation approached. We spoke more, frequently as spring arrived, though our conversations centered mainly on practical matters: the ceremony schedule, accommodation options for attendees, which law schools she was considering. She mentioned that Catherine and Robert had offered to host a dinner afterward for Megan and her friends, emphasizing that it would be just a small gathering at an Italian restaurant near campus. I began making preparations for the trip, setting aside money for a hotel room, researching transportation options from Albany to Princeton. I found a dress that seemed appropriate for a graduation ceremony, modest but flattering, not too casual but not overly formal. I wanted to look nice, for Megan to be someone she could introduce with pride. During one of our calls in early April, I mentioned my plans. "I've booked a room at that hotel you recommended, the one about 2 miles from campus. It was expensive, but I wanted to be close to everything." "Oh," Megan said, her voice suddenly tight. "About that. I've been meaning to talk to you. Graduation is going to be really hectic. There's limited seating at the ceremony, and with James's whole family coming. I only need 1 seat," I assured her. "Just for me." "Right. But they allocate tickets by student, and I've already promised mine to the Powells. They're a big family, and they've all been so supportive." I felt a chill creep through me, my hand tightening around the phone. "Megan, I'm your mother. Surely there's room for me at your graduation." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had that practiced quality I'd come to recognize. Calm, reasonable, but immovable. "Of course, and I'm trying to figure it out. It's just that the department ceremony might be a better option for you. It's smaller, more intimate. The main ceremony is going to be crowded and impersonal anyway." "I want to be at both," I said firmly. "This is a day we've worked toward your entire life. I'm not going to miss any part of it." "Mom," she said, her tone shifting to one of barely concealed impatience, "you need to understand that this is complicated. The Powells have connections with university administration. They donate to Princeton. They know the president personally. It's important that they be accommodated." "More important than your own mother being there?" I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. She sighed. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to navigate a difficult situation. Look, let me see what I can do. Maybe there are extra tickets available. I'll check and get back to you." But she didn't get back to me. A week passed, then another. My calls went to voicemail. My texts received brief, non-committal responses. As April turned to May, with graduation just weeks away, the truth became increasingly clear. Megan was avoiding confirming my place at her ceremony because she'd already decided I wouldn't have one. And then, on that Tuesday morning in early May, the email arrived as I kneaded bread dough in my kitchen. The message I'd been dreading but somehow expecting. "Mom, about graduation next month. I've been thinking it might be better if you don't come. There'll be a lot of important people there, and honestly, I'm worried you might not fit in." Hope. You understand. As I sat at my kitchen table, flour still coating my hands, I felt something inside me harden. This wasn't just about a graduation ceremony or limited seating. This was my daughter telling me, explicitly now, rather than implicitly, that I was an embarrassment, that I didn't belong in her carefully constructed new world, that the woman who had sacrificed everything to put her in that world was now an inconvenient reminder of where she came from. The pain was breathtaking in its intensity, a physical ache that radiated from my chest outward. But beneath the pain, another emotion stirred: anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly, but a slow, steady flame that illuminated things I'd been too willing to overlook. For years, I had accepted Megan's gradual distancing as a natural part of growing up. I had made excuses for her increasingly dismissive behavior. I had swallowed my hurt when she chose the Powells' glamorous world over our modest home again and again. I had told myself it was worth it because she was getting opportunities I could never provide. But this direct rejection, this explicit statement that I would embarrass her, crossed a line I couldn't ignore. It disrespected not just me as her mother, but everything I had done to make her Princeton journey possible. The bread dough sat forgotten on the counter as I picked up my phone and called my mother. Ruth answered on the third ring. "She doesn't want me at graduation," I said without preamble. She actually put it in writing. She's worried I'll embarrass her. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said simply, "What are you going to do about it?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected sympathy, perhaps outrage on my behalf. What can I do? I can't force her to want me there. No, Ruth agreed, but you can refuse to be erased. You can refuse to be ashamed of who you are and what you've done. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning it's time to tell the truth, Margaret, about where the money came from, about the sacrifices we've both made, about the fact that without us, without you, she wouldn't be graduating from Princeton at all. I considered this, turning the idea over in my mind. Part of me recoiled at the thought of using our financial support as a weapon against Megan. We'd made those sacrifices freely, without expectation of gratitude or recognition. But another part recognized the fundamental injustice in allowing her to continue believing she owed her educational success to mysterious church scholarships, rather than to her mother's bleeding feet after double shifts and her grandmother's carefully managed retirement fund. "It feels manipulative," I said finally, "like I'm only telling her because I'm hurt." "You're telling her because it's true," Ruth countered, "and because she's old enough to understand the reality of what it took to get her where she is. This isn't about making her feel guilty. It's about making her see clearly." After we hung up, I sat for a long time at my kitchen table, flour still dusting my hands, contemplating my next move. I drafted several replies to Megan's email, deleting each one. Too angry, too pleading, too passive-aggressive. Finally, I settled on simplicity. "I understand. Let me know if you change your mind. I love you." Then I began gathering documents, bank statements showing transfers to Princeton, pay stubs from my night shifts and weekend work, receipts from textbook, purchases and dorm supplies. My mother provided her own records, methodical as always. She had tracked every dollar contributed to Megan's education. Together, they told a story not of mysterious church scholarships or grants, but of two women working systematically to give a brilliant young woman access to an elite education. Two women who had never been embarrassed by their efforts, who had taken pride in their ability to make this possible through sheer determination and sacrifice. I also pulled together photographs and keepsakes that documented our journey. Megan's acceptance letter that we'd framed together, celebrating with ice cream sundaes at our kitchen table. A snapshot of her dorm room on move-in day, with me hanging curtains I'd sewn myself to save money. The program from her high school graduation, where she'd thanked me in her valedictorian speech for showing me that hard work and love can overcome any obstacle. These mementos weren't meant to induce guilt, but to remind both of us of a truth Megan seemed to have forgotten: that her journey to Princeton had been a shared one, built on love and sacrifice rather than privilege or entitlement. As graduation day approached, I didn't cancel my hotel reservation or request a refund for my new dress. Some stubborn part of me refused to accept that I would miss my only child's college graduation, not because I planned to show up uninvited, but because I held on to a thin hope that something would change, that Megan would come to her senses, remember who she was and where she came from, and realize that her embarrassment was misplaced. That hope dimmed with each passing day of silence. No calls, no texts asking how I was, no reconsideration of her request for me to stay away. The Megan I had raised, thoughtful, kind, aware of others' feelings, seemed to have disappeared entirely, replaced by someone I barely recognized. The weekend before graduation, I received an unexpected visitor. My doorbell rang on Saturday afternoon as I was folding laundry, still my go-to activity for working through difficult emotions. When I opened the door, James stood on my porch, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Mrs. Bennett," he said formally, "I hope I'm not intruding." Surprised, I invited him in, leading him to the living room where he perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa. He declined my offer of coffee or tea, getting straight to the point. "I wanted to talk to you about graduation," he said. "Megan told me she asked you not to come." I nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading. "That's right. She's concerned I might not fit in with the important people who will be there." James winced slightly. "That's why I'm here. I don't think she's being fair to you, and I told her so." This was unexpected. In my mind, James had been complicit in Megan's transformation, a catalyst for her growing shame about her background. "You did?" He nodded, looking genuinely troubled. "My parents raised me to believe that family comes first, always. When Megan told me she'd asked you to stay home, I couldn't believe it. We had a pretty significant argument about it." "I appreciate that," I said carefully, "but ultimately, it's her decision." "Is it, though?" he challenged gently. "She's making this decision based on, I don't know, some fear that doesn't actually match reality. My parents wouldn't judge you. They're not like that." I studied him, trying to reconcile this thoughtful young man with the image I'd formed of an entitled heir who had helped my daughter develop a taste for luxury she hadn't been raised with. Had I been unfair to him in my assumptions? "Why are you here, James?" I asked directly. "Did Megan send you to smooth things over?" He shook his head emphatically. "No, she doesn't know I'm here. I came because I respect you, Mrs. Bennett. Megan has told me about how you raised her by yourself, how hard you worked, and I think you deserve to be at her graduation. It's wrong that you're being excluded." His sincerity was difficult to doubt. I felt a surge of unexpected warmth toward this young man who had driven hours to advocate for me, apparently against my own daughter's wishes. "What do you suggest?" I asked. "I can't exactly show up where I'm not wanted." James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I think Megan is confused right now. She's trying so hard to fit into this world at Princeton that she's lost sight of what really matters. But deep down, I know she wants you there. She talks about you all the time, about how strong you are, how you made everything possible for her." "She does?" This didn't align with the daughter who had asked me to stay away from her graduation. "All the time," he confirmed. "That's why this doesn't make sense. It's like she's afraid of two worlds colliding, but they don't have to be separate. They're both part of who she is." I considered his words, turning them over in my mind. Was it possible that Megan's rejection wasn't about shame, but about fear? Fear of not being enough for either world? It didn't excuse her behavior, but it might explain it. "What are you suggesting?" I asked again. James straightened his shoulders. Come to graduation. I'll personally make sure you have a ticket. My family always gets extras because of their donor status. Sit with us. Let Megan see that these worlds can exist together. His offer was tempting, but I shook my head. I appreciate that, James. I really do. But I can't insert myself where my daughter has explicitly asked me not to be. That would only reinforce whatever she's afraid of. He looked disappointed, but nodded in understanding. Then what will you do? I took a deep breath, an idea forming. I think it's time for some honesty. About everything. I explained my plan to him, not to create drama or embarrass Megan, but to finally bring the truth into the light, about how her education had been funded, about the reality behind her opportunity at Princeton, about the fact that the divide she perceived between her two worlds was largely of her own creation. James listened intently, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he said quietly, "That's going to be a hard reality check for her." "Yes," I agreed, "but maybe a necessary one." He stood to leave, extending his hand formally. "Thank you for talking with me, Mrs. Bennett. For what it's worth, I think Megan is incredibly lucky to have you as her mother. I hope someday she realizes that." As I showed him out, he turned on the porch. "Whatever you decide to do, I support it, and I suspect my parents would too." After he left, I sat in my quiet house, thinking about his visit. It had shifted something in my understanding of the situation. Perhaps Megan's rejection wasn't as personal as it felt. Perhaps she was struggling with her own sense of belonging, caught between worlds and unsure of how to reconcile them. It didn't excuse her behavior. It didn't heal the wound of being asked to miss her graduation. But it offered a perspective I hadn't fully considered, that her actions might be coming from a place of fear rather than disdain. As graduation day drew closer, I made my final decision. I wouldn't show up uninvited to the ceremony, respecting Megan's explicit request no matter how much it hurt. But I also wouldn't continue participating in the fiction that had allowed her to separate her two worlds so completely. It was time for honesty, however uncomfortable. I gathered my documents, my photos, my evidence of our shared journey. I placed them in a simple envelope, not to use as a weapon, but to offer as a mirror, reflecting back to Megan a truth she needed to see. The morning of her graduation, I sent a simple text. "Congratulations on your achievement today. I am incredibly proud of you, even from a distance. I love you." She didn't respond. I hadn't expected her to. But as I moved through that day, working in my garden, preparing a special dinner for myself as a small celebration of what should have been a shared milestone, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had done everything I could to support my daughter's journey. I had sacrificed, worked, loved, encouraged. I couldn't control how she perceived those efforts or whether she valued them, but I could stand in my own truth without shame or resentment. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Did you hear from her?" Ruth asked without preamble. "Just silence," I replied. "But that's okay. This isn't about me." "Maybe not," my mother said, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "But for what it's worth, I'm proud of you, Margaret. You've been a better mother than I ever was." Coming from Ruth, this was extraordinary. "Thank you," I said, surprised to find tears springing to my eyes. "That means a lot." After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, contemplating the journey that had brought me to this point. From the young single mother determined to give her daughter every opportunity, to the middle-aged woman sitting alone on her porch on her daughter's graduation day. It wasn't the story I had imagined for us, but perhaps it wasn't the end of the story either. As the first stars appeared in the evening sky, I made a promise to myself. Whatever happened next, whether Megan came to understand the truth or continued to distance herself, I would not diminish myself or my worth. I would not be ashamed of my work, my home, my life. I had given my daughter wings to fly, even if she now chose to fly away from me. Tomorrow would be time enough to decide on next steps, to determine how and when to share the truth I had gathered. Tonight, I simply allowed myself to feel both the pride and the pain of this milestone, the culmination of decades of love and work, celebrated without me but meaningful nonetheless. When my phone pinged with a notification, I almost didn't check it, assuming it was a work update or news alert. But it was a social media tag. Megan had posted a photo from her graduation, a group shot with James's family. The caption read, "So grateful for everyone who made this day possible." Princeton 23. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement of the journey we had shared. In the photograph, Megan stood surrounded by the Powells, beaming at the camera, her cap slightly askew, her future seemingly secure. She looked happy. She looked like she belonged. And despite everything, I found myself smiling through tears at the sight of her joy. Because in the end, wasn't that what I had worked for? Her happiness, her success, her chance at a life without the limitations I had faced? It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to justify her rejection. But it was something to hold on to. As I prepared for what would come next, the necessary confrontation, the uncomfortable truth, the potential for either reconciliation or further division. As I finally went inside, closing the door on a day that had unfolded so differently than I'd imagined, I felt strangely calm. The time for silence and accommodation had passed. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter in our story, one written with clarity and truth, whatever the consequences might be. Grace set the casserole dish on my kitchen counter and turned to face me, her expression a mixture of sympathy and determination. We'd been neighbors for 15 years since I'd moved to this house when Megan was 8. Grace had watched my daughter grow up, had watered my plants during hospital shifts, had brought soup when either of us was sick. She knew me well enough to recognize when I needed company, even if I wouldn't ask for it. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, pulling out a chair at my kitchen table. "Sit. I'll make tea." I obeyed, too emotionally exhausted to protest. Grace moved around my kitchen with the familiarity of an old friend, filling the kettle, pulling down mugs from the cabinet where they'd always been kept. "So," she said as she waited for the water to boil, "no word from the graduate?" I shook my head. Nothing since the email asking me not to come. Grace made a sound of disgust. "I still can't believe that, after everything you've done for that girl." "She doesn't know everything I've done," I reminded her. "That was the agreement. My mother's money presented as scholarships, my extra shifts kept quiet. We didn't want her to feel burdened." "And now she's burdened by having a mother at all, apparently," Grace observed dryly. She poured hot water over tea bags and brought the mugs to the table, sitting across from me. "What are you going to do?" It was the same question my mother had asked, the question I'd been asking myself since the email arrived. What exactly was I going to do about a daughter who seemed determined to erase me from her narrative? "I'm going to tell her the truth," I said finally, "about where the money came from, about the sacrifices we made. Not to make her feel guilty, but because she deserves to know what it actually took to get her through Princeton." Grace nodded approvingly. "It's about time. That girl needs a reality check." "It's not about punishing her," I clarified, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "It's about honesty. We created this fiction to protect her, but it's become something else now. A wall she's using to separate her two worlds." "And how do you plan to deliver this truth bomb?" Grace asked. "Another email? A phone call?" I'd been considering this question since my conversation with James. The information was too important, too potentially life-altering to deliver remotely. "I think I need to see her in person. I'm going to drive to Princeton tomorrow. Grace's eyebrows shot up. You're going to surprise her? After she specifically asked you not to come? The graduation ceremony is over, I said. I respected her wishes about that. But before she moves to New York with James, before she starts this new chapter completely disconnected from where she came from, we need to have an honest conversation. Grace studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're a better woman than I am, Margaret. If my child had uninvited me from their graduation, I'd be sending a bill, not offering an explanation. I smiled despite myself. Well, I might bring some visual aids that look suspiciously like invoices. Grace laughed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. That's my girl. A little righteous indignation looks good on you. After she left, I packed a small overnight bag and gathered the documents I'd been collecting. Bank statements, pay stubs, photographs. I arranged them chronologically in a folder, creating a paper trail that documented the journey from Megan's acceptance letter to her graduation day. Seeing it laid out like that, I was struck by the sheer scale of our collective effort. Thousands of hours worked, tens of thousands of dollars contributed, countless sacrifices, large and small. That evening, I called my mother to share my plan. You're driving all the way to Princeton? Ruth asked, skeptical. What if she refuses to see you? Then at least I'll know I tried, I replied. I can't just let this hang between us, Mom. It's too important. I suppose you're right, she conceded. But call me when you get there. And Margaret, don't back down. That girl needs to hear the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. I promised I would hold firm, then asked, would you like to come with me? After all, it's your story to tell too. There was a pause on the line. No, she said finally. This needs to be between you and Megan first. Besides, I'm not sure I could be as diplomatic as you plan to be. I might just tell her she's being an ungrateful brat. I laughed softly. And that's exactly why you should probably stay home. The next morning dawned clear and warm, a perfect late spring day. I loaded my bag and folder into the car and started the 3-hour drive to Princeton. The route was familiar. I'd driven it dozens of times over the past 4 years, usually with a car full of supplies for Megan's dorm room or apartment. This time, the back seat was empty except for my purse and the folder. As I drove, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain our deception without making it sound like we expected gratitude or repayment, how I would express my hurt at being excluded without triggering Megan's defensiveness, how I would bridge the growing chasm between us without forcing her to choose between her worlds. I arrived on campus around noon. Princeton was quieter than usual, most students having left after graduation, but there were still families wandering the grounds, taking final photos before departing. I parked near Megan's off-campus apartment, a small 2-bedroom she shared with a roommate in a well-maintained complex about a mile from the main campus. As I walked to her building, I felt a flutter of anxiety. What if she refused to see me? What if she was already gone, moved out, headed to New York or the Powells' summer home without a word? What if this confrontation only drove her further away instead of bringing understanding? I pushed these fears aside and climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment. Outside her door, I took a deep breath and knocked firmly. No answer. I knocked again, longer this time. Still nothing. Just as I was about to turn away, the door of the neighboring apartment opened. A young woman with curly hair and glasses peered out. "Are you looking for Megan?" "Yes," I replied. "I'm her mother, Margaret Bennett." Recognition flashed across her face. "Oh, Mrs. Bennett, I'm Zoe. I've heard so much about you." There was something careful in her tone, something that suggested what she'd heard might not have been entirely positive. "Is Megan around?" I asked. I was hoping to catch her before she leaves campus. Zoe hesitated. "She's actually at the Powell's Hotel right now. They're having a farewell brunch at the Nassau Inn before heading to Cape Cod for a few days." My heart sank. Of course she would be with James's family. Of course there would be another elegant event I wasn't invited to. "The Nassau Inn," I repeated. "Thank you, Zoe." She looked conflicted, as if debating whether to say more. "Finally," she offered. "The brunch is in the main dining room. It started at 11. I thanked her again and headed back to my car. The Nassau Inn was Princeton's historic hotel, located in the heart of town near the university gates. I'd walked past it many times but had never been inside. It was well beyond my budget, a place where visiting dignitaries and wealthy alumni stayed during special campus events. As I drove the short distance to the hotel, I questioned my decision. Was I really going to interrupt a private brunch hosted by the Powells, march in uninvited, and demand a conversation with my daughter? It seemed invasive, potentially embarrassing for everyone involved. Exactly the kind of scene Megan had feared I might cause at graduation. But then I remembered James's words, that his parents weren't the judgmental people Megan seemed to fear, that they respected family bonds and would understand my perspective. And I remembered my own resolution. No more hiding. No more diminishing myself. No more accepting exclusion as if I deserved it. I parked in the hotel's small lot and walked into the elegant lobby, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. The Nassau Inn was as impressive inside as out. Dark wood paneling, oriental rugs, historically appropriate furnishings. I approached the front desk and asked for directions to the main dining room. "It's right through there, ma'am," the clerk said, pointing toward a set of double doors. "But if you're looking for the Powell graduation brunch, I believe it's a private event." So I was that obvious. Clearly not a regular guest. Clearly not part of the Princeton elite. I straightened my shoulders. My daughter is with the Powell party. I need to speak with her briefly. The clerk looked uncertain but nodded. Of course, the dining room is just through those doors. I walked toward the indicated entrance, my folder clutched perhaps too tightly in my hand. Through the partially open doors, I could see round tables draped in white linen, floral centerpieces, well-dressed people engaged in animated conversation. A typical Princeton scene, elegant and exclusive. I paused at the threshold, suddenly, unsure. Then I spotted Megan, seated at a central table beside James, laughing at something his father was saying. She looked beautiful in a pale blue dress I'd never seen before. Her dark hair swept up in a style that emphasized her long neck and fine features. My daughter, the Princeton graduate, perfectly at ease in this rarefied environment. For a moment, I simply watched her, this young woman I'd raised who now seemed like a stranger. Then, before I could lose my nerve, I pushed open the door and stepped into the dining room. The maitre d' approached immediately. "May I help you, ma'am?" "I need to speak with my daughter," I said, nodding toward Megan's table. "It will only take a moment." He glanced toward the Powell party, clearly recognizing them as important guests. "Let me see if they're accepting visitors. Your name?" "Margaret Bennett. I'm Megan Bennett's mother." His expression shifted subtly. Recognition, perhaps surprise. "One moment, please." As he walked toward the table, heads began to turn in my direction. I stood quietly, conscious of my simple dress and practical shoes amid the designer outfits surrounding me. But I didn't shrink or apologize with my posture. I belonged here as much as anyone. I had earned my place in this room through years of sacrifice and love. I saw the maitre d' speak quietly to Robert Powell, who looked up in my direction. Then Megan turned, her expression morphing from confusion to shock to something like panic. She said something to James, who turned to Y. "Look at me as well." To my surprise, he smiled and stood, gesturing for me to join them. As I approached the table, conversations hushed. Robert Powell rose, extending his hand. "Mrs. Bennett," he said warmly. "What an unexpected pleasure. Please join us." His greeting seemed genuine, without the condescension I might have expected. Catherine Powell smiled as well, though more reservedly. Yes, do sit down. We were just discussing Megan's brilliant senior thesis. Megan remained frozen, her face pale, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine fear. "Mom," she managed finally, "what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," I said simply. "I apologize for interrupting your brunch." "Nonsense," Robert said, signaling for a waiter to bring another chair. "Family is always welcome. James mentioned you weren't able to make it to the ceremony yesterday. We missed having you there." James shot Megan a pointed look at this comment, and she had the grace to flush slightly. "Please sit," Catherine urged, indicating the chair now being positioned between her and Megan. I sat, placing my folder on my lap. The waiter immediately poured me coffee and offered the brunch menu. I declined politely, feeling Megan's tension radiating beside me. "I'm so glad we finally get to meet properly," Catherine continued. "Megan speaks so highly of you." "Does she?" I wondered, glancing at my daughter, who was now studiously examining the remnants of her eggs Benedict. I doubted very much that. Megan had shared anything substantive about her nurse mother from small-town Millbrook with these sophisticated people. "That's kind of you to say," I replied. "I've heard wonderful things about your family as well. Megan has clearly enjoyed her time with you all." James's younger sister Emily, seated across the table, leaned forward. "Megan told us you're in healthcare administration. That must be so interesting, especially after these crazy pandemic years." I noticed Megan tense even further at this comment. The familiar fabrication, my job upgraded from nurse to healthcare administration to sound more impressive. "Actually," I said calmly, "I'm a registered nurse. I work night shifts at Albany General, primarily in the cardiac care unit." A small silence followed this correction. Megan stared fixedly at her plate. Catherine recovered first. "That's incredibly admirable work. Healthcare heroes, as they say. You must be very proud of Megan's accomplishments." "Extraordinarily proud," I agreed. "Princeton has been a wonderful opportunity for her." "And well-deserved," Robert added. "Megan's one of the brightest young minds I've encountered. We're very pleased she'll be joining our foundation team in New York." The conversation continued, flowing around me as I sipped my coffee and observed the dynamics at the table. The Powells were indeed gracious, seemingly genuine in their inclusion of me. James was attentive, occasionally squeezing Megan's hand reassuringly. And Megan, my confident, articulate daughter, remained unnaturally quiet, clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop. After about 20 minutes, when the meal appeared to be winding down, I turned to Megan. "Could we speak privately for a moment? I won't keep you long." She glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course," she said tightly. "We can talk in the hotel garden." We excused ourselves from the table, Robert insisting that I was welcome to return for dessert. As we walked through the dining room and out a side door to the garden, Megan maintained a careful distance between us, her posture rigid with tension. The garden was small but lovely, with stone pathways winding among carefully tended flower beds. We found a secluded bench beneath a flowering dogwood tree, sitting at opposite ends like cautious strangers. "Why are you here?" Megan asked immediately, her voice low and controlled. "I thought I made it clear." "That you didn't want me at graduation," I finished. "Yes, that was very clear. But we need to talk, Megan, about things that have been unclear for far too long." She glanced nervously toward the hotel. "This isn't the time or place, Mom. The Powells have been incredibly generous, hosting this brunch for my friends and professors. I can't just disappear for a heart-to-heart." "I'm not asking for a heart-to-heart," I said, opening my folder. "I'm here to give you some information. Information you should have had long ago." I removed the first document, a bank statement, showing a transfer of $32,000 to Princeton University, dated August of her freshman year. I handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, glancing at the paper. That's your first semester tuition payment, I said. Not from a church scholarship fund, but from a joint account held by your grandmother and me. Her brow furrowed. I don't understand. I pulled out another document, my pay stub from the care facility where I'd worked weekends during her sophomore year. And this is from my second job, the one I never told you about because I didn't want you to worry. Megan looked up from the papers, confusion evident in her expression. Second job? Mom, what are you talking about? I took a deep breath. There was never a church scholarship, Megan. There was just your grandmother and me, putting aside everything we could to pay for Princeton. Your grandmother contributed from her retirement savings. I worked extra shifts and a weekend job. We created the scholarship fiction because we didn't want you to feel burdened by our sacrifices. She stared at me, then back at the documents, in her hands. But all those thank you notes I wrote to the church committee went to your grandmother, who kept them in a box in her hall closet, I finished. She cried when she read them, by the way, said you had a beautiful way with words. Megan's face had gone pale again. Why are you telling me this now? Because it's time you knew the truth about where you come from and what it took to get you where you are, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Not to make you feel guilty, not to demand gratitude, but because you seem to have developed the idea that your mother, your actual background, is something to hide or be ashamed of. She looked away, but not before I caught the flash of recognition in her eyes. That's not fair. Isn't it? I asked quietly. You've been systematically distancing yourself from me for years. Spending holidays with the Powells instead of coming home. Describing my job as something more prestigious than it is. And finally, asking me to stay away from your graduation because you were worried I might not fit in with the important people who would be there. Megan flinched at hearing her own words repeated back to her. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it then? She was silent for a long moment, staring at the papers in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. Things at Princeton are complicated. There's so much inherited privilege, so much assumed wealth and connection. When people found out I was on scholarship, they looked at me differently. Some of them, anyway. So you created a different narrative, I supplied. One where you weren't a small-town girl with a single mother who works as a nurse, but someone with connections and family money. She looked up, defensive now. You don't understand what it's like there. The subtle ways people judge you, the doors that open or close based on where you come from. Maybe I don't, I acknowledged. But I do understand what it's like to be erased from my daughter's life because I don't fit the image she's trying to project. Megan winced. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I said simply. Not just by excluding me from your graduation, but by being ashamed of who I am, what I do, where we come from. By being ashamed of the very things that made your Princeton education possible. She was quiet again, turning the papers over in her hands. Does James know about this? About the scholarship being not real? He knows I wanted to tell you the truth. He came to see me last weekend. Her head snapped up. James came to our house? He never said anything. He was concerned about your decision to exclude me from graduation, I explained. He thought it was wrong. He offered to get me a ticket, actually, but I declined. I wouldn't go where I wasn't wanted. Megan looked stricken. So both of you have been talking about me behind my back? No, I said firmly. We've been trying to understand why a bright, compassionate young woman would suddenly decide her mother was too embarrassing to include in one of the most significant days of her life. She had no immediate answer for this. Instead, she gazed at the financial documents again, tracing the numbers with her finger. I had no idea, she said finally, about any of this. The second job, Grandma's savings. I thought the scholarship covered most of it. "We wanted it that way," I said. "We didn't want you worried about money or feeling obligated. We wanted you focused on your studies and your opportunities. But all those extra shifts, the weekend job, it must have been exhausting." I shrugged. "It was worth it. To see you thrive at Princeton, to know you were getting the education and opportunities you deserved. I never regretted a single hour." Tears filled her eyes then, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in months. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because we thought we were protecting you," I said. "And maybe, if I'm being completely honest, because I was afraid of exactly what ended up happening, that you would see Princeton as your ticket to a different life, a life where your background became something to overcome or hide, rather than a source of strength." Megan wiped at her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," I told her. "Just think about it. About the truth of where you come from and what that means. About the people who loved you enough to make sacrifices without recognition or gratitude. About whether that's something to be ashamed of or something to honor." She nodded silently, tears still rolling down her cheeks. We sat there for several minutes, the only sounds the distant traffic and the flutter of dogwood petals falling around us. Finally, Megan spoke again. "I am ashamed," she said quietly. "Not of you. Never really of you, though I know it seemed that way. I'm ashamed of myself, of how easily I let myself be intimidated by the wealth and privilege at Princeton, of how quickly I started hiding parts of my life to fit in." I reached out and took her hand. It's a powerful force, that desire to belong, especially somewhere like Princeton, where the markers of belonging can be so subtle and exclusive. "But that doesn't excuse what I did," she insisted, "especially asking you not to come to graduation. That was... I don't even know how to explain it. I was so caught up in this image I was trying to maintain. This idea that if people saw where I really came from, they might think I didn't belong there after all." "And do you think that now?" I asked gently. "That your background somehow makes you less worthy of Princeton?" She looked up, a flash of the old Megan, confident, clear-eyed, breaking through. "No. If anything, it makes me more worthy. I worked harder to get there. I overcame more obstacles." "Exactly," I said, squeezing her hand. "Your journey to Princeton wasn't diminished by where you started. It was made more remarkable." She nodded slowly, then looked back toward the hotel. "I should probably get back to the brunch soon. The Powells will be wondering where we are." "Of course," I agreed, beginning to gather the documents back into my folder. "Wait," Megan said, placing her hand on mine. Can I keep these? I want to understand exactly what it took. All of it." I hesitated only briefly before nodding. "They're yours. I brought them for you." She carefully folded the papers and placed them in her small purse. "Thank you for coming today, for telling me the truth, even though it was hard to hear." "That's what mothers do," I said simply. "Tell the hard truths with love." We stood, and to my surprise, Megan stepped forward and embraced me tightly. It was the first genuine hug she'd given me in longer than I could remember, not the perfunctory greeting or farewell I'd grown accustomed to, but a real connection. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered against my shoulder. "For everything." I held her close, breathing in the scent of her expensive perfume, feeling the fine fabric of her dress against my arms. My daughter, straddling two worlds, perhaps finally, understanding that she didn't have to choose between them. "I know," I said softly. "It's okay." When we pulled apart, she wiped her eyes carefully and straightened her dress. "Will you come back inside? Have dessert with us? I'd like to properly introduce you to everyone." The invitation, so simple yet so meaningful, brought tears to my own eyes. "I'd like that very much." As we walked back toward the hotel, Megan linked her arm through mine in a gesture that felt both protective and proud. James's parents really aren't as intimidating as I made them out to be, she confessed. Catherine actually reminds me a lot of you. Practical, no nonsense, incredibly competent. I noticed that, I said, smiling. She seems lovely. She is, Megan agreed. And I think they'll respect you even more when they know the truth about what you did to get me through Princeton. I stopped walking, turning to face her. Megan, you don't need to tell them that. That's private between us. She shook her head firmly. No, Mom. I'm done hiding where I come from. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not. If I'm going to work at their foundation, focusing on educational access, I should start by being honest about my own story. There was a new determination in her voice, a clarity that reminded me of the Megan I'd known before Princeton. Direct, authentic, unafraid. Perhaps the truth, painful as it had been to confront, was already having its effect. Whatever you decide, I said, I'll support you. She smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I know you will. You always have, even when I didn't deserve it. We re-entered the dining room together, arm in arm, no longer separated by the invisible barriers of shame and pretense. As we approached the Powell table, James looked up, his expression shifting from concern to relief when he saw us together. Everything okay? He asked quietly as we rejoined the group. Megan nodded, her hand finding his under the table. Getting there, she said. Then, more loudly, she addressed the entire table. I'd like to properly introduce you all to my mother, Margaret Bennett. Without her, I wouldn't be here today. Not just at Princeton, but anywhere. She's the strongest, most dedicated person I know, and I'm incredibly fortunate to be her daughter. The simple introduction, spoken with evident sincerity and pride, felt like a homecoming, a return to the relationship we'd had before Princeton, before the gradual distancing, before the painful exclusion. It wasn't a complete healing. That would take time and more honest conversations. But it was a beginning, a first step toward reconciliation and understanding. As dessert was served and conversation flowed around us, I caught Megan watching me with new eyes, seeing me not as an embarrassment to be managed or a reminder of a past she wanted to escape, but as the woman who had helped make her dreams possible, the woman who had loved her enough to let her go, even when that meant being left behind. And for the first time in years, I felt truly seen by my daughter. Not perfect, not idealized, but real, with all my sacrifices, struggles, and strength finally acknowledged and valued. It wasn't everything, but it was enough for now. Enough to build upon. Enough to hope that the chasm between us might eventually be bridged, not by pretense or performance, but by truth and mutual respect. Later, as I prepared to drive back to Millbrook, Megan walked me to my car. "When will I see you again?" she asked, an echo of the little girl who had never wanted me to leave. "Whenever you want," I said simply. "My door is always open to you. It always has been." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. The Powells invited me to Cape Cod for a few days, but I was thinking, maybe I could come home afterward, before we start looking at apartments in New York, just for a week or so. The casual mention of home, not your house or Millbrook, but home, felt significant. "I'd like that very much," I said, smiling. "Your room is just as you left it." "With the Princeton pennant and the track trophies?" she asked, smiling. "Birkin and the stuffed bear you've had since you were 3, I confirmed. "The one with the missing eye." She laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard in too long. "Mr. Binks, I can't believe you kept him." "Of course I kept him. He's part of your story. Part of our story." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. "I have a lot to think about everything you showed me today. Everything you and Grandma did. Take all the time you need, I said. The truth isn't going anywhere. She hugged me again before I got into the car, holding on a beat longer than necessary. Thank you for coming today, she said as she stepped back. For fighting for us when I was too caught up in everything else to see what matters. As I drove away, watching her figure grow smaller in my rearview mirror, I felt a cautious optimism. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were years of distancing to overcome, patterns of behavior to change, truths still to be fully processed and accepted. But we had taken the first step, acknowledging the reality of our shared journey with all its sacrifices and complications. And perhaps most importantly, Megan had begun to see that her two worlds didn't have to remain separate, that she could bring together the achievements of Princeton and the foundations laid in Millbrook, the sophisticated connections of the Powells and the unwavering support of her mother, that she could be proud of where she came from and where she was going, without diminishing either. It wasn't the graduation day I had imagined all those years, watching my bright-eyed daughter set her sights on an Ivy League education. But in its own way, it marked an equally important milestone. Not just Megan's emergence into the adult world with her prestigious degree, but the beginning of a new, more honest chapter in our relationship. One built not on pretense or protection, but on truth and mutual respect. As I crossed the bridge out of Princeton, heading back toward the life I'd built with pride and purpose, I felt something lift from my shoulders, the weight of being the unacknowledged foundation of my daughter's success, the unseen sacrifice behind her achievements. Whether or not Megan ultimately shared the full truth with the Powells or her Princeton friends, she knew it now. And that knowledge, painful as it had been to impart, might finally free us both from the fiction we'd constructed together, allowing something more authentic to take its place. I watched Megan carefully as we drove the familiar route from the bus station to our house. She seemed both present and absent, her gaze moving over the unchanging landscape of Millbrook, the same diner where we used to get Sunday breakfast, the park where she learned to ride a bike, the library where she'd spent countless hours preparing for her Princeton application. Her face revealed nothing of her thoughts, but her hands fidgeted in her lap, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "Have you eaten?" I asked, breaking the silence. "I was just making pasta when you called." She turned to me with a small smile. "That sounds perfect, actually. The food on the bus was, well, bus food." We lapsed back into silence until I pulled into our driveway. The house looked exactly as it always had, modest but well-maintained, with the flower beds I tended on weekends and the porch swing Thomas had installed when Megan was a toddler. Nothing special to most eyes, but it had been our sanctuary, our home base, the place where we'd weathered every storm together. Until Princeton had created a storm I couldn't shelter her from, or perhaps one she no longer wanted shelter from. Megan stared at the house for a long moment before opening her car door. "It looks exactly the same," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "Did you expect it to change?" I asked, popping the trunk to retrieve her suitcase. She shook her head. "No, I don't know. It feels different somehow. Smaller, maybe." "That's what happens when you spend 4 years in Gothic buildings with soaring ceilings," I said lightly, trying to ease the tension between us. "Regular houses start to look like doll houses." She didn't smile at my attempt at humor, just continued, staring at our home with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Finally, she grabbed her carry-on bag and headed for the front door, leaving me to wheel her larger suitcase behind her. Inside, Megan paused in the entryway, taking in the familiar surroundings, the faded area rug we'd bought at a yard sale. When she was 10, the gallery wall of her school photos and achievements, the bookshelf overflowing with medical texts, and the mystery novels I read to unwind after shifts. Her gaze lingered on a newer edition, a framed photo of her at her high school graduation, arms around me, both of us beaming at the camera, a time when she had been proud to have me by her side. "You can take your things up to your room," I said, wheeling her suitcase toward the stairs. "I'll finish making dinner." "I can help," she offered quickly. "With dinner, I mean." The offer surprised me. During her brief visits home over the past few years, Megan had shown little interest in such domestic collaborations, usually retreating to her room with her phone or laptop. "That would be nice," I said. "Everything's already out on the counter." In the kitchen, we fell into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new, Megan chopping vegetables while I prepared the pasta and sauce. We worked mostly in silence, but it was a different quality of silence than in the car. Less strained, more contemplative. As we sat down to eat at the small kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, helped with homework, planned for her future, Megan finally spoke about what had brought her home so unexpectedly. I couldn't stop thinking. "About those bank statements," she said, pushing pasta around her plate. "And your pay stubs from the care facility. All those weekend shifts I never knew about." I nodded, giving her space to continue. "I went to Cape Cod with the Powells like I'd planned," she continued. "Their summer house is, well, it's exactly what you'd expect. Right on the water, 5 bedrooms, private beach access. Beautiful." "Sounds lovely," I said neutrally. "It is. And they were so kind, including me in everything, treating me like family." She set down her fork. "But the whole time I kept thinking about what you showed me, about how you worked double shifts and weekends while I was sending you those short texts from Princeton, barely telling you anything about my life there. About how Grandma used her retirement savings while I was inventing stories about her old money to impress James's sister." I reached across the table to touch her hand. "Megan, we didn't tell you about those sacrifices because we didn't want you to feel burdened. That was our choice. But it created this fiction," she said, meeting my eyes. "This idea that my Princeton opportunity just appeared magically, that I deserved it without any help, that I'd somehow earned it all on my own." "You did earn it," I insisted. "Your grades, your essays, your interviews, those were all you. The financial part was just logistics." She shook her head firmly. "It wasn't just logistics, Mom. It was sacrifice. Real sacrifice that I never acknowledged or appreciated because I didn't know about it." She paused, twisting her napkin in her hands. Or maybe because I didn't want to know about it. This last statement hung between us, profound in its honesty. For the first time, Megan was acknowledging not just the facts of our deception, but her own complicity in maintaining it. Her willingness to believe the convenient fiction we'd created, because the truth might have complicated her Princeton narrative. "On the second day at Cape Cod, we went sailing on Robert's boat," she continued. "Everyone was talking about summer plans, the charity gala they host each year, the 2 weeks they spend in France, their traditional August trip to Nantucket. Normal conversation for them." I nodded, picturing the scene. The beautiful boat, the sophisticated people, the casual discussion of privileges most people would consider extraordinary luxury. "James asked what my summer traditions were growing up," Megan said. "And I almost started making something up, some story about vacation homes or European trips. The lie was right there, ready to go." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "But then I thought about those bank statements, about all those hours you worked, and I couldn't do it." "What did you say instead?" I asked quietly. A small smile touched her lips. "I told them about our real summer traditions, the community pool where you taught me to swim, the library reading program where I won prizes for finishing the most books, the weekend camping trips to the state park when you could get time off, how we saved all year for our one big splurge, the 3 days at Virginia Beach for my 13th birthday." I remembered that trip vividly. The moderate hotel 2 blocks from the ocean, the packed lunches to save money, Megan's absolute delight at building sandcastles and jumping waves. It had been a stretch financially, but her joy had made every penny worthwhile. "How did they respond?" I asked, curious about these people who had become so central to Megan's life. They were interested, actually, asked questions, wanted details. Catherine said it sounded wonderful, that experiences like that build character in a way that luxury vacations never could. Megan's expression grew thoughtful. And the strangest thing happened, Mom. Once I started telling the truth, I couldn't stop. It was like finally being able to take a deep breath after holding it for years. What do you mean? She set down her napkin. I told them everything. About growing up here in Millbrook. About you raising me alone after Dad left. About how you worked night shifts so you could be at my school events during the day. About Grandma helping with tuition that we presented as scholarships. She paused. About how I'd been hiding parts of my background at Princeton because I was afraid of not fitting in. I was stunned by this confession. I had hoped our confrontation might lead to more honesty between us, but I hadn't expected Megan to reveal everything to the Powells, to make herself so vulnerable with people. She'd been trying to impress. How did they take it? I asked carefully. Better than I deserved, she admitted. Robert said he was impressed by our resourcefulness and determination. Catherine. Megan's voice caught slightly. Catherine said she wished more of her. Children's friends understood the value of hard work and sacrifice instead of taking privilege for granted. Relief washed through me. The Powells were exactly as James had described them, not the judgmental elitists Megan had feared, but thoughtful people who recognized value beyond wealth and status. After dinner that night, James and I took a walk on the beach, Megan continued. He told me he'd visited you the weekend before graduation, that he'd offered to get you a ticket to the ceremony. He did, I confirmed. He was very concerned about your decision to exclude me. He told me what you said, that you wouldn't go where you weren't wanted. Megan's eyes filled with tears. God, Mom, when he said that, it hit me so hard. All these years, you've never pushed, never demanded, never made me feel guilty for pulling away. You just kept loving me, kept supporting me, even when I was treating you like someone to be managed rather than appreciated. The tears spilled over now, tracking down her cheeks. I told James I needed to come home, to talk to you properly, to try to understand how I became someone who could ask her mother, the person who sacrificed everything for her, to stay away from her graduation because she might not fit in with the important people. I reached for her hand again, holding it tightly. Megan, Princeton is a powerful environment. The culture, there, the expectations, the unspoken rules about who belongs and who doesn't, those forces shape how you see yourself in the world. It's not entirely your fault that you absorbed some of those values. But it is my fault, she insisted. I made choices. Every time I downplayed where I came from, every time I embellished to sound more like my Princeton friends, every time I chose their world over coming home. Those were my choices. No one forced me to make them. Her self-awareness was both painful and hopeful. Painful to hear her acknowledge the hurtful choices she'd made, hopeful because this recognition was the first step toward change. What happens now? I asked gently. Megan wiped her eyes with her napkin. I don't know exactly. I'm still taking the job with the Powell Foundation. It's a great opportunity, and I think I can do meaningful work there. James and I are still planning to move to New York together. She paused. But I'm going to do it differently, honestly. No more hiding where I come from or who my family is. No more pretending to be someone I'm not. That sounds like a good start, I said. It's more than that, she insisted. I want to rebuild what I've damaged between us. I want you to be part of my life again, really part of it, not just someone I call occasionally or visit when it's convenient. The sincerity in her voice touched something deep within me, a hope I'd been afraid to acknowledge during the years of her gradual distancing. I'd like that very much, I said simply. She squeezed my hand. I've missed you, Mom. The real you, not the sanitized version I've been presenting to my Princeton friends. I've missed this house, this town. Everything I've been pretending wasn't important to me. We sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of this confession. Does Grandma know I'm here? Megan asked eventually. I nodded. I called her while I was driving to pick you up. She's expecting us for lunch tomorrow. Megan winced slightly. She's going to read me the riot act, isn't she? Probably, I acknowledged with a small smile. But she'll do it because she loves you, and because she's Ruth Carter and has never held back an opinion in her life. This earned a genuine laugh from Megan. True, I should probably bring her flowers, and a bulletproof vest for myself. After dinner, Megan insisted on doing the dishes while I made tea. As we settled in the living room, the familiar routine felt both comforting and slightly tentative, like we were finding our way back to each other through well-worn patterns that had been disrupted. I should warn you, Megan said, curling up on the sofa with her mug. I called James while you were in the shower this morning. He's driving up this weekend to meet Grandma properly, if that's okay with you. I was surprised but pleased. Of course it's okay. This is your home. James is always welcome here. She smiled gratefully. He wants to know you better. Both of you. He says he's heard fragments about my family for years, but never the whole story. And you're ready to share the whole story now? I asked, watching her carefully. The real story, not the edited version? She nodded firmly. Yes. No more editing, no more omissions. James deserves the truth, and so do you. The next few days unfolded in a pattern that felt like a bridge between our past closeness and whatever new relationship we were building. Megan and I talked for hours, more honestly than we had in years. She shared stories from Princeton, not just the glossy, impressive achievements she'd selected for our occasional calls, but the struggles, the insecurities, the moments of feeling out of place among classmates with generations of privilege behind them. There was this dinner during sophomore year, she told me as we weeded the garden together, at the eating club James belonged to. Everyone was talking about their family vacation homes, not showing off, just casual conversation about places. They'd been going since childhood. Someone asked where my family vacationed, and I panicked. What did you say? I asked, pulling a stubborn dandelion from between the tomato plants. I made up a place in Maine, she admitted, not meeting my eyes. Said we had a cottage on the coast that had been in the family for generations. I even added details. A widow's walk, a private dock, rooms named after relatives. The specificity of the lie surprised me. That's elaborate. I know, she said, clearly ashamed. Once I started, I couldn't stop, and then I had to remember the details because people would ask about it later. How was Maine this summer? Did you get out on the boat? It became this whole alternate reality I had to maintain. I sat back on my heels, wiping dirt from my hands. That sounds exhausting. It was, she agreed. And not just that lie. All of them. All the little adjustments and omissions and enhancements. Always being on guard, always worried someone would discover I wasn't who I was pretending to be. She looked up finally. The irony is, I was so afraid of not belonging at Princeton that I ended up not belonging anywhere. Not there, because I wasn't being authentic, and not here, because I'd convinced myself this life wasn't good enough anymore. Her insight was profound and painfully earned. And now? I asked. Where do you belong now? She gestured around. Us, at the modest garden, the simple house, the life we'd built together. Here, at least partly. This will always be home, always be part of me. Then she smiled. But also in the life I'm building with James, at the foundation, in New York. I'm starting to see that I don't have to choose. I can be the daughter of a night shift nurse from Millbrook and a Princeton graduate working at a prestigious foundation. Both can be true. Our lunch with my mother the next day was exactly as predicted. Ruth didn't hold back her feelings about Megan's behavior, particularly the graduation exclusion. But beneath her stern exterior, I could see her relief and joy at having her granddaughter back, at seeing the genuine remorse in Megan's eyes. "Well," Ruth said after Megan's heartfelt apology, "I suppose everyone deserves a second chance, even spoiled Ivy League graduates who forget where they came from." Megan winced, but there was a glint of humor in her eyes. "I deserve that." "You deserve worse," Ruth retorted, then softened slightly. "But you're here now, facing the music. That counts for something." By the time James arrived on Saturday, a tentative new equilibrium had been established. Megan had spent hours with my mother, looking through the box of scholarship thank you notes she'd written over the years, now understanding their true significance. She'd helped me in the garden, cooked dinner with me, even accompanied me to the grocery store where I'd worked part-time during her high school years, reconnecting with former co-workers who'd watched her grow up. When James's car pulled into the driveway, Megan went out to meet him, speaking earnestly as he retrieved his overnight bag from the trunk. I watched from the kitchen window, giving them privacy but curious about their interaction. James listened intently, then pulled her into a tight hug, kissing the top of her head in a gesture of such natural affection that I felt a pang of recognition. That was how Thomas used to comfort Megan when she was small, before he decided family life was too constraining for his ambitions. They came inside together, James carrying his bag and a bouquet of flowers. "Mrs. Bennett," he said warmly, extending the bouquet. "Thank you for having me." "Margaret, please," I corrected, accepting the flowers. "And thank you for coming. I know it's a long drive from Princeton. Worth every mile," he said, glancing at Megan with obvious affection. "I've heard so much more about Millbrook this week than in the past 2 years combined. I'm excited to see it properly." We spent the afternoon showing James around our small town, the high school where Megan had been valedictorian, the park where she'd broken her arm falling from the monkey bars at age 9, the ice cream shop where we'd celebrated every report card and school achievement. It wasn't impressive by Princeton standards, but James seemed genuinely interested, asking questions and listening attentively to our stories. That evening, Ruth joined us for dinner at our house. I'd worried about how my blunt-spoken mother would interact with James, but they got along surprisingly well, bonding over a shared interest in environmental conservation and sustainable agriculture. "Megan tells me your family foundation is developing programs for first-generation college students," Ruth said as we cleared the dinner plates. "Is that something you're personally involved with?" James nodded. "Very much so. My parents were both first in their families to attend college, actually. People assume we're old money because of the foundation and my father's success. But my grandparents were farmers in Pennsylvania and factory workers in Michigan." This revelation surprised me, and clearly surprised Megan too, judging by her expression. "James, you never told me that," she said. He looked slightly embarrassed. "You never asked about my grandparents. And honestly, there's a culture at Princeton of not discussing those details unless they're impressive. It's subtle, but real." Ruth nodded approvingly. "Good to hear you recognize that. Too many people get caught up in appearances." "I've been guilty of it," James admitted. "It's easy to absorb those values without even realizing it. But my parents raised me to remember where we came from, to understand that privilege isn't just something you enjoy, but something you're responsible for using well." After dinner, as Ruth prepared to leave, she took James aside for a private word. I couldn't hear what she said, but his serious nod and respectful response seemed to satisfy her. "He'll do," she announced as I walked her to her car. "He sees Megan clearly, both her strengths and her flaws. That's important in a partner." "I think so too," I agreed. "Though I'm curious what you said to him just now." Ruth smiled enigmatically, Just making sure he understands what our girl needs, both the brilliant Princeton graduate and the small-town daughter who sometimes forgets her own worth. The next morning, James insisted on making breakfast for everyone. As we sat around the kitchen table eating the French toast he'd prepared, Megan broached the subject we'd all been dancing around. "Mom, I've been thinking about graduation," she said carefully. "About how I handled it. About what I missed by not having you there." I set down my coffee, waiting for her to continue. "I know there's no way to redo that day," she said, "but the law school I'm planning to apply to for next year. When I get in, if I get in, I want you there. Front row. Not hidden away, not separate from the other parts of my life. Right where you should be." "I'd like that," I said simply, touched by her certainty that I would be included in her future milestones. "And in the meantime," she continued, "I'd like you to visit us in New York once we're settled. See the apartment, meet our friends, be part of our lives there. If you want to." "Of course I want to," I assured her. James nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. And my parents asked me to extend a specific invitation for Thanksgiving at their house in Connecticut. Both of you, and Ruth too, if she's willing." The invitation touched me deeply, not just because it included me in their holiday plans, but because it represented exactly the kind of integration Megan had been avoiding for years, the bringing together of her two worlds. "I'd be honored," I said. "Though I should warn you, my mother has very strong opinions about the correct way to prepare cranberry sauce." James laughed. "So does mine. Maybe we should put them in charge together and see what happens." Later that day, as James and Megan prepared to leave, he to return to Princeton for his summer research position, she to New York to start apartment hunting, we stood in the driveway saying our goodbyes. The weekend had been healing in ways I hadn't dared to hope for, bridging gaps I'd feared might be permanent. "I was thinking," Megan said as she hugged me, "about that scholarship fund Grandma supposedly created. The New Horizons scholarship that never actually existed." "What about it?" I asked. "Maybe it should exist," she said thoughtfully. "Not just as a cover story, but as a real thing. The Powell Foundation is always looking for local initiatives to support. What if we established an actual scholarship for students from Millbrook going to elite universities? In Grandma's name, since it was her idea originally." The suggestion took me by surprise. That would be incredible, Megan. Your grandmother would be so proud." "We could start small," she continued, warming to the idea. "Maybe one student per year, but it would be real, transparent, documented, not hidden behind stories and excuses. And it might help other kids from here who feel like I did, caught between worlds, unsure if they belong in either." "I think it's a wonderful idea," I said, touched by her desire to transform our family fiction into something that could help others. As they drove away, waving through the open windows, I stood in the driveway watching until their car disappeared around the corner. The weekend hadn't erased the hurt of the past few years, and especially of the graduation exclusion. Those wounds would take time to fully heal, but it had laid a foundation for something new, a relationship based on honesty rather than performance, on acceptance rather than pretense. That evening, I called Grace next door to update her on the weekend. "So, she's really changed?" Grace asked skeptically. "This isn't just a temporary guilt trip before she disappears into Manhattan high society?" "I think it's real," I said, considering the question carefully. "Not because she's suddenly rejecting Princeton or the opportunities it's given her, but because she's finally finding a way to integrate all the parts of herself, where she's from and where she's going." "And you? Are you okay with all of this? With how things worked out?" I thought about the bank statements and pay stubs I'd shown Megan, about the years of sacrifice those documents represented, about the graduation ceremony I'd missed. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "The truth is, I would do it all again. Every extra shift, every missed vacation, every penny saved. Not because Megan is perfect or because she's never hurt me, but because being her mother, helping her find her path, is the most important work I've ever done. Even when that path took her away from you? Grace pressed. Even then, I confirmed. Because the point was never to keep her here. It was to give her wings strong enough to fly wherever her dreams took her. I just needed her to remember who helped her build those wings. And does she remember now? I thought about Megan's face as she'd looked through the financial documents, about her honesty with the Powells, about her plans for the real New Horizons scholarship. Yes, I said with certainty. She remembers. And more importantly, she's not trying to forget anymore. In the weeks that followed, Megan's promise to maintain our reconnection proved genuine. She called regularly from New York, sharing details of apartment hunting with James, her preparations for starting at the Powell Foundation, her explorations of the city. Not just the polished highlights, but the real experiences, the overpriced, too small apartments they rejected, her anxiety about making a good impression at work, her occasional homesickness for the familiar rhythms of Millbrook. When they finally found an apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a diverse neighborhood, not the doorman building in an exclusive area she'd originally described, Megan sent photos of the empty rooms, asking for my advice about furniture and decor. Nothing fancy, she explained. We want it to feel like home, not like a showplace. My mother and I drove to New York together to help them move in, bringing home-cooked meals for the freezer, curtains I'd sewn for their living room windows, and a small herb garden for their tiny balcony. Ruth presented them with a special housewarming gift, a handmade quilt incorporating fabrics from significant moments in Megan's life, including a square from her Princeton Acceptance Day outfit. So you never forget where you came from, Ruth said gruffly as Megan unwrapped it, or what it took to get you where you are. Megan hugged her tightly. I won't forget, Grandma. Not ever again. That evening, after Ruth had gone to bed in the hotel room we were sharing, Megan and I sat on her small balcony, looking out at the city lights. It wasn't the spectacular view she might have had in a more exclusive building, but it was vibrant and real, much like the life she was choosing to build. I've been thinking about what you said at the Nassau Inn, she said, sipping from a mug of tea. About how my journey to Princeton wasn't diminished by where I started, but made more remarkable. I remember, I said. I didn't fully understand it then, she admitted. But I'm starting to. The other day at orientation for the foundation, we went around the table sharing what brought us to work in educational access. When it was my turn, I told the real story about growing up in a small town with a single mom who worked night shifts, about not knowing how I'd afford Princeton, about the sacrifices you and Grandma made to get me there. How did people respond? I asked. She smiled. They were moved. Several people came up afterward to share similar stories, and my supervisor said she wished more people in philanthropic work had direct experience with the challenges they're trying to address. She paused. It felt good, Mom. Really good. To claim my whole story, not just the Princeton parts. I reached over to squeeze her hand. I'm proud of you, Megan, not just for your achievements, but for your courage in facing the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. She leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that my heart constricted. I wasted so much time being ashamed of things I should have been proud of, she said quietly. I can't get those years back. I can't undo asking you to miss my graduation. But I promise you'll never have to wonder where you belong in my life again. As we sat there, the sounds of the city creating a backdrop to our quiet conversation, I felt the last pieces of hurt begin to dissolve. The journey hadn't been what I expected when I sent my bright-eyed daughter off to Princeton 4 years ago. There had been more distance, more pain, more misunderstanding than I could have anticipated. but we had found our way back to each other. Not to the same relationship we'd had before, but to something new and perhaps stronger, forged through honest confrontation and genuine reconciliation. Megan would always be shaped by her Princeton experience, by the opportunities it had given her, the connections she'd made, the perspectives she'd gained. But she was also still shaped by Millbrook, by the values we'd instilled in her, by the resilience and work ethic she'd learned growing up in our modest home. She didn't have to choose between these influences. She could integrate them into the remarkable young woman she was becoming. And I could be part of that journey, not hidden. Away like an embarrassing secret, but embraced as an essential element of her story. Present at future graduations, included in holiday gatherings, welcomed into the life she was building with James. Not because she felt obligated, but because she finally understood that true belonging comes not from erasing your past, but from honoring it with all its complications and imperfections. As night fell over the city, Megan and I sat in companionable silence, no longer separated by the invisible barriers of shame and pretense. The journey ahead would have its own challenges, its own moments of adjustment and growth. But we would face them together, with a new foundation of honesty and mutual respect. And perhaps that was the most valuable education of all, the understanding that our worth isn't determined by degrees or institutions or impressive connections, but by the authenticity of our relationships and the integrity of our choices. It was a lesson that had cost us both dearly, but one I believed would guide Megan far beyond anything she'd learned in Princeton's hallowed halls. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.